Hello, this is Avni Majitya Sejpal, and you're listening to the New Thinking podcast. Today, I'm at the Dallas City Hall with David Slayton, who is Administrative Director of the Texas Office of Court Administration in Austin. We're both here at Reinvesting in Justice, a conference that brings together a wide range of criminal justice practitioners to discuss challenges and highlight innovative work being done in the field of criminal justice across the state of Texas and elsewhere. David is speaking on a panel about procedural justice in a little while here, specifically as procedural justice intersects with thinking about racial disparity in the justice system. David, welcome to the New Thinking podcast.
It's great to be here.
Today's big subject is reinvesting in justice. From where you sit, what does reinvesting in justice even look like, and why is it so important right now?
I think right now we face really challenging times in making sure that the dollars and the efforts that we put into criminal justice are being effective at what we want them to do, that the outcomes are important. It's not just about inputs and outputs anymore, whereas maybe in the past that was a huge focus of how many cases can we get done or how many are we having filed, really more focusing on are we actually making an impact with the efforts that we're putting in? And I think that's an exciting thing to be able to focus on as we do our work.
For the benefit of those who are not here today, can you summarize what your panel is going to be about and what you specifically will be talking about?
I think, so we have the Dallas City Police Chief on the panel, which will be really interesting to hear his perspective on law enforcement's interaction with the public. We're going to have the Deputy Director of the Texas Indigent Defense Commission, whose focus is upon court-appointed counsel and, of course, making sure that there's a feeling of fairness in that system. And I'm particularly focusing on procedural fairness and the work that we're doing in the state to try to make sure that people not only are being treated fairly, but that they feel that they're being treated fairly in the court system. And obviously, that feeling is as important as the reality.
And can you talk about procedural fairness?
Sure. One of the key things with procedural fairness is that, we want to make sure that when people enter the court system that they know what to do and that they understand what's going on. The court system has been around for centuries, and it's built for attorneys who are very learned in the system and understand exactly how it works, built for judges. Sometimes the language that's used and the procedures that are used in the courts are not as easily understandable to the public, and sometimes that leads to confusion, leads to feelings of unfairness, and so making sure that people not only are treated fairly, but that they understand what's going on, that they are able to understand those procedures and the forms and the languages that's going on is really important. And then obviously at the end of the day, making sure that people are indeed treated fairly based upon the situation in their case, and that outcomes are similar for all different groups, no matter what their background is.
There's a lot of discussion across the spectrum about racial disparities in the criminal justice system and outside of it. Can you talk about how maybe procedural fairness actually addresses that or can possibly address that?
Yeah, I think one of the real key things that's important, I'm going to be talking about this on my panel today, is the need for us to really take a hard look at that with data. There are different communities that are involved in our criminal justice system who are overrepresented. We know that for a fact. We see it. And oftentimes I'm not sure that we've in the past been willing to take a hard look at the data to see what are those degrees of overrepresentation. And what I see happening today, at least in the judiciary in Texas, is really a willingness to really peel back the layers and see what does the data show as far as the effect on different groups and the disparities that are there, and what can we do about it, whether it be in the child protective system, child welfare system. We've been looking at that, the truancy system, the children involved in the juvenile justice system, all the way up to the criminal justice system. I think it's really important for us to take a look at that, and obviously making sure that people are being treated from the beginning of their involvement in the system all the way through the end is important, and I think procedural fairness plays a big part in that.
And what is the data telling us?
Well, I think the data is revealing what we know, which we know anecdotally, which is that there is indeed overrepresentation of certain groups. And I look in particular to a study that was done a few years ago that has had tremendous impact in our state, which was a report called Breaking Schools Rules. It was done by the Council of State Governments Justice Center and the Public Policy Research Institute from Texas A&M. And it looked at about 1 million kids in our school system here in the state, and basically what their involvement was in the school ticketing for minor offenses. And what the report found is that, number one, that there was overrepresentation of minorities, but even disparity in the treatment of those minorities. minorities for similar based offenses. With all other factors equalized, their educational background of the parents, to the income, to school district, to even school campus level, if we equalized all of those things, the factor that still showed as differentiation in the way that they were treated was oftentimes race. Besides race, we also saw an issue with individuals who had disabilities being overrepresented and the treatment being different. And so what that led to was really a real focus and a real effort to try to reform and put in place reforms that would help address that. And, it's a really exciting thing to be able to see the data show that and then to take action based upon that.
Are there specific practices of procedural fairness that can actually address some of these disparities that we're talking about?
One of the things that's really important is the training that we've been, and I'm going to talk about this today too, is the training that we've been doing with judges on implicit bias. We know it exists. We know as humans, we have our biases. And I think it's sort of like the step one of AA, admitting that you have a problem is sometimes the number one. And I think a lot of times just for judges and court staff and prosecutors and defense attorneys to realize that they have implicit bias is an important factor. And then controlling that with tools to make sure they can overcome those natural biases that exist. And so I think that's number one, the training behind that is really important. And then number two, really trying to overcome that by making sure that we have, things like community courts and drug courts, making sure that the people who are on the bench and in the courtroom look and act like we do, that speak the same language that we do. All those types of things I think are really important to making sure that people really do feel that the system is fair and that they're not going against someone who is very different than them, speaks a very different language from them, and therefore they don't feel that they're getting treated as fairly as they should.
Are there any interesting initiatives in the state of Texas that you can talk about?
One of the things that I'm going to talk about today, when I was the court administrator in Lubbock County, which is a medium-sized county in West Texas, the judges there really felt like it was important to ask the people who were coming before them how they felt about the job the judges were doing. In fact, they labeled it Judge the Judges. And so everyone who went before the judges was asked to answer a survey about their interactions with the judges that day. And some of the questions that they asked were, first of all, was, finding the courthouse easy? Did I have the forms that I needed? Did I feel safe? Was I able to do my business in a reasonable amount of time? And were the hours that the court was open, did that make it easy for me to conduct my business? Because oftentimes that can be an issue. But then it went a step further, and for those individuals who actually appeared before a judge, it asked them the following questions, or they were asked to grade on these statements, which is, the judge listened to my side of the story before the decision was made. The judge had information necessary to make a good decision. I was treated as everyone else, and as I leave, I know what to do next. And what we did was we asked everyone who was leaving the courthouse that had been before a judge, how do you feel about this? And we got some really great feedback. We asked, information on the survey about demographics and what type of case it was and which court level they went before, and really started to get some information that allowed us to drill down into the feelings of different individuals who were coming before the courts. And it gave the judges valuable feedback as to how they could address the issues that might be a concern for the public. And so that's one example. We've seen some other courts in the state also replicate that survey, and I think it's really just helping us to use that information to make positive changes within the court system.
When it comes to procedural fairness, there are sometimes skeptics who suggest that perceptions of fairness have very little to do with actually adjudicating and also take up a lot of time that judges and others don't necessarily have. Are there ways that you address that skepticism?
I'm going to say this today, and I think it's in this day and age really true that the public sees the court system through the lens of the entire system, the entire criminal justice system. So if you have police brutality, or you have a wrongful conviction, or you have an issue in the defense side or the prosecution side, it's all the court system in people's eyes. And so I think we have to think about this with our partners in the criminal justice system as a system-wide issue that we have to address. And if we don't do that, I'm not sure we really make a real difference. And so, I think that's the key, is really looking at that from the system-wide perspective and then making changes based upon that.
What are some of the most urgent challenges facing procedural justice, particularly as it pertains to dealing with some of the racial disparities that we're seeing across various platforms and institutions in the country right now.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about this today. One of the real issues that I see is the whole issue of community engagement. I've been talking at the state level with the Chief Justice and others about the need for us to really do a better job of engaging with the community. In the past, when we've looked at judges doing community engagement, it's been going to the Rotary or going to the Bar Association and speaking. And I'm not sure that's exactly the type of community engagement that is most beneficial. And we need to figure out a way to get into different communities across our state and in our local communities and have discussions about how do you feel about the court system? What do you think the challenges are that, how can we better connect? And I think that's one of the biggest things. I think the second thing in my mind that we could do better is to be even more transparent. We're doing our best to be transparent, but there's even more we can do. For instance, we have limitations in our data. If someone asks me for racial disparity data, I have limitations in what I can say. And so we're doing some work at the state level to try to get more data that's more granular, that we can be able to really take a look and study these issues a little bit better. And then the last thing I would say is really opening up our records from a perspective so that anybody can see what's going on. You mentioned earlier about, is this a real issue? Is this a perception issue? It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. Perception is reality. And so I think making sure that people can actually validate or not their assumption is really important. And so that transparency, I think, is really key.
Great. David, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me today.
I'm Avni Majidhya Sejpal, and I've been talking to David Slayton at Reinvesting in Justice about racial disparity and the need for procedural fairness. To listen to more New Thinking podcasts or to learn more about our work, you can visit our website at www.courtinnovation.org. Thanks so much for listening.